My name is Stacy Solsaa, and I'm a counselor. I've worked as a school counselor. I was 12 years in like a small school district. I had K through 12 students, so like 300 kids barely, in the school that I was at. I actually also did some work for Lutheran Social Services. I worked through the Watertown office for about, I don't know, 12 years also, but while I was working in the school, I did so there's some overlap there. And then I went back for my PhD in counselor education and supervision, and I'm doing a little bit of adjunct teaching at SDSU, and I opened up a private practice now in Watertown about a year ago. Well, in January it'll be a year ago, so 8 months into that. I'm married to a farmer, which is why after I got my PhD I did not go looking for jobs somewhere else, because I am kind of stuck where I'm at. So this presentation, we kind of wanted to just talk a little bit about farm culture for those of us who maybe aren't farmers, or those of us who maybe that's not our profession. And so that was kind of what this presentation is tailored to. It was really hard to know what kind of information to put in this presentation, because I wasn't sure who the audience was really going to be. And so I don't want to insult anybody by what's there, so we're going to do some kind of fun little term stuff, and if it's things you already know, I do apologize for some of that kind of stuff too. But hopefully the idea is just to kind of get a little bit more background in agriculture and farming and ranching. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how to connect with those people when they're in your office or in your business and those kind of things too. If it's not an ag-related business, how do you connect with farmers and ranchers? The first thing, I don't know, this maybe isn't a big, maybe all of us in this room know this, but it seems to be this debate about what's farming and what's ranching and what's the difference. So there is actually technical definitions, but, and basically farming is actually production of crops, but around here, on the east side of the state especially, we find that a lot of those farmers have cattle or livestock of some sort, as well as crop production also. So I included that kind of in the definition. And then ranching is mostly, there might be a little bit of crop, but for the most part that's the grazing of cattle or sheep or goats or whatever it is that their livestock is on the open range. So, well, not open, but because you have to have some fences. So, some fun facts that I found: 98% of U.S. farms are run by families, and we kind of most of the farmers that we know are family farms. Ranches the same way. One U.S. farm feeds about 166 people. Farmers receive only about 15 cents per dollar from the food that you buy that's in your household. And this is kind of crazy. It's down from 31 cents in 1980. Now I think about when my husband buys seed, and when he puts fertilizer on the crops and all that kind of stuff to grow them, and I think about how much money that costs now versus it did 5 or 10 years ago, and I think this is really crazy, but that's just my perspective. So women make up 36% of all U.S. operators, and about 6% of all U.S. farms have at least one female that makes decisions. And I think this has been a change over the last, I don't know, maybe 10, 20 years. A lot more women are taking part in actually being a farmer or a rancher. They're out there working alongside their spouse or their families, and having a big part in the farm and the ranch. And over half of American farms are initially provided or intentionally provide habitats for wildlife. And I thought that was kind of nice. Farmers give back to the wildlife and the land around them. Livestock grazing takes up about 20% of all U.S. land, which is about 614 million acres. 58% of farmers and ranchers have been in the family, their family has been in that business for about 3 generations. I think about my grandparents had a farm, but they were dairy farmers, and then we're kind of cattle farmers. But both of those would have been, my dad's parents got out of it because they didn't have anybody to take over the farm. But that would have been a 3-generation farm if they would still be working on it. And then my husband's farm is also about 3 generations too. And so most of us see that. You also see sometimes brothers or sisters and partners kind of coming together. And then you get a little bit bigger more of a corporation. Sometimes they're just partnerships. But you see some of that happening too today. There's lots more science in the cattle production. They are fed to grow. And so there's a lot more involved in different things like that. Fat has been cut by 44% from your beef that you buy from years back too. So I thought some of those kind of facts are kind of interesting, something kind of different. So we're going to do a little bit of technology. Now some of you might be alone at your table. If you want to pop over to another table, you can, or you can kind of work on this on your own. What type of products are produced by farmers and ranchers around here? Take a couple minutes, and then, actually, who has an answer? I'll give you a piece of candy. How about that? Anyone? What kind of products? Okay, livestock. What is big? It's a big room. I might have to take my bucket with me. What else? Dairy products, yes. 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 Does anybody know what that is?
Do they know what Milo is?
Yeah. It's not the most common.
Let's feed
Yep.
Beans, I think there's beans raised around here.
Bean, corns, all that kind of stuff. Sorry, Margie, I was short. Anything else? Sunflowers. You see a lot of those this part of the country, don't you? Small grain. Whoops, I dropped that one. Yes, sorghum too. Whew. Sorghum. Anything else? Honey. Oh. You have one. Pigs. Eggs, yes. So chickens, eggs, all that kind of stuff also, right. There's tons of different products. All right, now we're going to go with the terminology. I'd like you to do this with your table. Get out a piece of paper, see if you know what these words mean, and we'll just talk about it in a couple minutes. There's lots of them up there, some acronyms. All right, you guys ready to talk about some of these terms? How many of you knew all of them anyways, and this was pointless? I hope there's not too many of you, sorry. It was just hard to know. Yes, Margie. That's, is someone else want to share? Anybody know?
The expected progeny difference.
Yes, that's right. Yep, and what that means is it's a bunch of numbers really, but it helps you compare, like if you're talking, I know mostly with cattle, and I think it's with some other animals have it as well, but it allows you to compare two animals. So if you're at the sale barn and you're trying to buy a bull or you're trying to buy a cow, you can look at those numbers and you know how much milk they produce and you know how much, the birth weight, the weaning weight. So you want the birth weight to be maybe a little smaller, and you want the weaning weight to be big because that means they made a lot of growth between the time they were born until the time that you weaned them from their mother. So there's, yeah. Anything else? I mean, I've got the definitions written totally down, so that's the benefit of the PowerPoint. But any of the other ones that you guys want to talk about that you don't really know what they are? So there's all the definitions for you. Most of them are, if you've been in the egg industry or know anybody that's been a farmer or anything like that, you know what those kind of things are. Any other ones that you had questions about that we want to visit about? My husband thinks he's funny. He likes to, point out the difference between hay and straw all the time. So I don't know. You'll say hay and he says no, you straw or something. I don't know. It's kind of weird. He's goofy. So there's just all of those definitions for you. This slide I thought was kind of fun though. Just a few little kind of funny jokes. And I think if you know that industry well, these will probably hit home a little bit. Yeah, my son hurt his shoulder in the first football game of the season, and so we had some of his friends from the football team came out and we had a bunch of square bales that needed to be picked up, and they picked them up and threw them in the barn and stuff, and they were like, oh, that was worse than lifting weights. So I thought that one was kind of cute. All right, so I'd like you actually to take a minute to actually talk at your tables. And when you think about farmers, ranchers, what are the things that you guys think about? What maybe sets that group apart? And this is hard to talk about because it feels like stereotyping people, and we don't want to do that ever, I don't think. But I want you to take a few minutes and what are the things that you feel like set farmers and ranchers apart from maybe the banker or your professor at college? Are there certain things about being a farmer or a rancher that's different? Is there a table that would like to kind of share some of the thoughts that they had?
Connection to family, the land, traditions, culture, community.
Yeah, so it's all those connections with the area that they live in, that they're at, and yeah, definitely. And it goes back, like you said, it's families, generations of connection, really. That's a good way to explain it. I think that's good. What else?
Strong work ethic.
A very strong work ethic, right?
No candy?
Oh, I'm sorry. Gotta get the candy bucket. It's on the other side of the table. Ooh, an extra piece. Right?
Thank you.
Give you each one. Okay, there's no vacation days. And that is really true. Just when you think that you have a vacation day and you have a day that you can maybe go do something with your family, the cows are out, or they have to come cut silage today because they can't go to that place because they have something else going on. So it gets kind of crazy sometimes. Oh, I like that. Explain which. Sorry.
You take risks every day. By buying a wall.
Right. It's thought through and it's calculated, but everything's a risk. Oh gosh, I don't know if any of you ever heard of Schaff Angus before. We bought a bull up there. They're in North Dakota. They're kind of spendy bulls up there. So we pay half. My father-in-law's pays half. So this is $18,000 we're talking about. He's supposed to be really good. So he's out there kind of, hanging out in the corral. He broke his penis, and he was not worth anything except hamburger after that. So, yeah, ouch. So, what?
That's like eating gold.
It was like, yeah, pretty much. He was really good hamburger, though. Really good steaks. No. But yeah, those kind of things happen. And no matter what it is, that's just kind of a weird example. I don't know, I've never heard of that happening before. So when my husband told me that that's what was wrong with him, I was like, oh, great. I think he got a couple cows before that, but not many. So, I don't know, we had some really good daughters out of him. But yeah, not $18,000 worth, so.
You see that farmers are jack of all trades?
They are.
So many skill sets that they don't really give themselves credit for doing.
That's true. If you need something fixed or you need something welded, you kind of just learn how to do some of those kind of things, or your father taught you, or your brother taught you, or that kind of thing. My husband's probably the worst mechanic, but he does a lot of other things too. So, other thoughts or other things that you guys were talking about?
You see the start to finish. The seed goes in the ground and you see it harvested, and you see the calf born, and if you're, finish out your calves, you see them until they go to harvest, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
There's something to be said for that.
There is something to be said for that. And there's some pride in all of that too, I think. They do. Probably not very many more passionate people out there than farmers and ranchers.
I don't need candy, but they're very prideful when they ever ask for help.
And I think that's what makes counseling or reaching out, or those when they really do need help from anybody, that's what makes it hard. They might be having something really, storm come in and wiped out some stuff in their yard, and their neighbors will show up to help them, but they're not going to come and go ask them to do so. And I think it's hard too. Sometimes there's some isolation in farming too, but it's not always there, but at times I think it is too. And so I think you might have a neighbor that's really struggling, and you might not know that they're struggling. So maybe that family has to see it. So farming is in your blood. Have you ever heard that before? Yeah, and obviously not literally, but it is that kind of thing that it is, you're there your whole life, at 6 years old, you're out there with livestock. You know, you're driving the four-wheeler, you're driving the tractor when you get a little bit older, all those kind of things. My daughter must have been about, I don't know, 8, 10. A couple of years ago, we were sorting out moms from the babies or whatever, because we were just kind of trying to sort cattle, and so we were putting them in different yards, and we needed them to work some of them. We needed them apart. And she was standing with this one cow. And we got rid of her, but my daughter's standing here, and the cow comes out of the back of the barn, and there's like nowhere for her to go. The cow just takes after her. So she runs through the whole yard. Our silos there, and she slid through the silo or whatever to get away from this cow. That's scary, but it took her a little while to get back in there again, but she does. So it's just part of your life. The role of women has been changing over the years, and we didn't talk much about that, but I think that's been something too that we see with farmers and ranchers also. And it's a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week job. You guys kind of touched on some of that too. I think sometimes the education piece, the jack of all trades, I think to me that fits it right with that too. They maybe don't, they're not your person that's gone to maybe 20 years of college or something like that, but they're very educated people. They use so many different skills that we don't even think about sometimes on a daily basis. So, I want you to think though for a minute. This is kind of where that calculated risk kind of comes in a little bit too. But something special, maybe one of your grandparents gave it to you, a pocket watch, grandma's china, those kind of things. And I think the hard part is the risk is that when you're farming, those things could be gone. It's not those items, it's the farm. And it's not just an item, it's your way of livelihood. But the way the farming industry is right now, it's really, especially for small family farmers, it's really very hard to sometimes make ends meet and all of that. And everyone has an operating loan, it seems like these days. And so think about that, though. If that item was just gone, that'd be hard. And I think a lot of farmers, producers, ranchers, whatever, they're dealing with that today. So, there's, I don't know, the market prices. I don't know, I think I see lots of kids, obviously, because I was a school counselor before. So I had these kids in my office, and their mom brings them in, 3 boys. I've seen them probably for a couple of years now, just kind of off and on with different things. They have got some, just their ADHD and some of that kind of stuff going on. But the prices had just come out, the new, report, or egg report or something had come out, and she comes in, and she's just in a tizzy herself about all of this. And the corn prices were way down and all of this kind of stuff. And so that's the kind of conversation that you have when they come in your office. We didn't talk for probably 5 minutes. We talked about that. Before we talked about the kids and how they were doing and all of that. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. We talked about this too. It's hard for farmers to ask for help. Anxiety, depression, that's just part of life. Come on, it'll go away. But it really doesn't. And that's where it kind of changes, and we have to think about how do we get that person who really does have depression to see somebody that they need to see. It's one thing to go to the doctor, which is kind of hard to do too sometimes, but it's another thing to go to a counselor and get help for something that we just think is part of life. My grandparents went through depression. They dealt with worse than this. Oh, I'm fine. You hear things like that from people all of the time. So this is kind of the making the connections piece. And so think about how do you make connections with farmers, with ranchers. That's maybe not the most conventional if I'm going to sit in my office and wait for them to come to my door. I think the last few months I've had a lot of referrals from the clinics though in our town. So they're going to see their doctor, and the doctors are doing such a great job these days of identifying depression and anxiety. So that's been a good thing. I've gotten more referrals from there too. But how do you connect with those people in their community and in your community? I think that makes it hard too, because we do live in small communities, and you have all that ethical stuff about, well, I'm seeing my neighbor for counseling. Oh, how's that going to work? So it does get hard though, but they need services, and so maybe you're not the person that's going to see them, but they know you, and you have a connection somehow. So maybe there's somebody that you know that would be really good for them, and that you can make that referral to. And so it's getting out there and connecting. And so I just was trying to brainstorm some ideas, and these are just things I came up with. You know, I don't know, my husband's always dragging me on plot tours or something like that, you know. So when you're out there, pay more attention, you know, have conversations, not just about the livestock and those kind of things or the crops, but how are they really doing? And I think there's ways, as you're talking to people, to kind of bring those kind of things into the conversation. My husband's on the Pheasants Forever planning committee, so I guess we're going to that this weekend, but sometimes maybe that's just another place to make connections too. You know, everyone's kind of sitting around visiting, it's a social thing. And there's, you know, there's farmers and ranchers there too sometimes, and so there's just ways to make connections with people that aren't your traditional. Even just kind of contacting a pastor, doing a presentation at a church, contacting your local elevator and just saying, you know, if you're having some kind of an event, they do those elevator meetings like once or twice a year, you know, do you need a little speaker just to talk a little bit about stress or something? I'd be happy to come out and do that. And I know those things are free and we don't always have a lot of time to do things for free, but I think it's needed in the community, and it's a way to make those connections with people that might not just kind of walk into your office. So I had heard someone say, well, why don't you just go out there and get in the tractor and have a counseling session? Well, you know, I got to drive from that one and then go to that one over there. But I got 2 people seen today. So it's not practical to do that necessarily, but I think there's ways to make those connections that are practical and useful too. I'd like any other ideas. This is just kind of me trying to think, how about you guys? Are there other ways that you can think of, places to go to connect?
One year, I went on the Ames Bowl tour.
I have been actually. I have. It is a lot of fun. I would have to agree with you.
Definitely a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, make some connections.
You do.
Like that, so.
Very true. They do a couple of them. This year it's West River. I saw the flyer that just came out. Yeah. And then I've been to one down by Copels and down by the Mitchell area, kind of down there. And then we went up to North Dakota one year too on one of those. But it's any of those kind of events that are happening. And you're out there and you're just being a part of their culture. And I guess it's my culture too because I live on a farm. But so it's just, I don't know, I think that's important. You do connect with a lot of people. And my kids went with us. They missed school. But it was okay. We figured, you know, they're learning something doing that too. So, other ideas. I keep losing my clicker. Yeah, absolutely. So in Castlewood, the little town I live by, they have morning coffee at the co-op, and they also have morning coffee in the C-store. So, yeah, that's a good thing. That's a good idea too. Definitely. I got some candy, but I'm over here. Other thoughts?
Any of the implement places where they have to go get parts.
Yeah. You know, even if you just make out some flyers or some brochures, you can put information out too that they might just pick up while they're sitting on the counter. I bet there'd be lots of places like that that would allow you to put things out there.
You can contact the cooperatives and ask to speak at one of their annual meetings.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. A friend of ours invited us to the Cattlemen's Gala. Huge thing that they do. It's actually a fundraiser for Feeding South Dakota, but that, you know, it's another one of those kind of big events that might be a platform too, that, you know, maybe they need someone to speak there. So.
You know, our keynote speaker this morning said something about community workshops, like maybe putting that in place where you're going town or county meetings.
Mm-hmm. Actually, Margie and we were kind of visiting about some of that too, talking about maybe pairing with some of the churches and doing, you know, you have it after church on Sunday, you have potluck and you visit and talk, and maybe there's a little speaker on mental health or stress or something like that too. So, yeah. Oops, I didn't get over to you, sorry.
We are talking about how can we carry some of this forward. So if you have a real strong idea or you know this should happen in my community, talk to us, South Dakota Counseling Association people, so we get your names down. Try to
Yeah, because really the idea of that is to do it in a community that's maybe needs it, but aren't reaching out or seeking out, and have local people, not just us, because nobody knows us in that community, but people that live there, and that can make those referrals to mental health in that area too. So, I feel like I'm getting way off track, but anything else that, yeah. Yeah.
How many, has research been done on how many elderly people, single or as couples, you know, in their 80s or whatever, still live on the farm?
You know, I was trying to put research behind my presentation to find anything, and I couldn't find a lot on that, but that's a good thought too. I can do some looking, but I don't know if there's much research out there about anything.
And then how many,
True.
how many family members are also a part of that farming and taking the caregiver role?
That's true, because that adds another stress. I mean, I know several people right now that are taking on that caregiver role for their parents, and it's hard enough to get a parent living in town to go to an assisted living or something like that, but it's even harder to get someone who's living on a farm to move off that farm, too. I had a gentleman that I saw, his wife pushed and pushed and pushed to get him to come to counseling, and finally he did, and she came with him every time, and you know, that's they were there together, and you let that go because she was his support system in all of that, but he was really struggling with, I can't do some of the things I need to do anymore. I'm running cattle. My son's not helping me that much anymore. I have a seed business. I'm selling seed, and he's like had the anxiety and some depression with that. And his wife's like, I want to move to town. All my friends live in town, and and so you have all of these different things going on, and so then when he's sitting in your office, again, the first thing you don't talk about is, well, what brings you guys in? It is, how's the weather today? He'd always start, well, did you guys do this yet, or did you wean calves yet? Like he'd start the conversation off like that most of the time. And I think, I don't know how many of us in counseling, right here, keep the small talk out of the counseling, because it interferes with what you need to be doing, because you could spend a whole session doing small talk. So that's kind of what we're taught, but really you need to have the small talk. Especially, I don't know, well, a lot of us figure that out in any kind of rural small communities, you need to have that. But with the farming community, I find it even more. They still see my name, or they'll heard that you're ready to do a farmer. Well, what do you guys, first question out of their mouth before I even get to ask them anything is, well, oh yeah, I heard that name before. You guys have cattle, right? Or something like that, to that effect or whatever. And so it kind of makes the comfort level go up a lot, I think.
But then how do you transition from
And that is hard. And so it is. It's kind of, you're having that small talk, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh gosh, and that we were doing this, and then, oh gosh, I had so much anxiety when that happened. You know, I heard your wife was kind of saying that you have a lot of anxiety. What's that about? And so it's kind of finding a way to transition. And I think bringing yourself into it, we just kind of learn, watch the personal stuff too a little bit. And I think there's still those boundaries that you absolutely have to keep. But it's okay to talk about your farm or my grandparents. Oh, gosh, I spent every summer out there. Any way that you can make it a connection, or a friend of mine. You know, I think all of that stuff becomes relevant because if you understand them and know them, then I think they feel more like they can tell you things. And I don't know, I think that's with a lot of people, but I feel like it's more true with the farm population, the farmers and ranchers out there. So I find that, and I think the transition is hard, but I think it's kind of this dance, which sounds weird, of going back and forth between talking about things that are relevant to them, and then finding a way to make mental health a part of what's relevant to them also, I think. You know, gosh, I had this one gentleman, he couldn't remember anything. He just was under so much stress. He was leaving stuff places all over the place, and he couldn't find this tool or that thing that he left there kind of thing. And so we kind of got him writing things down. I got him doing some different things, some anxiety techniques and stuff. And then he's like, gosh, I found that. That was really, now I know what I do with those kind of things. And so like he started to be more present and paying more attention. And so then once he saw it was going to help him, that was even better, because then he bought into it a little bit too, you know. And so it's, I don't know, it's a trick. I don't know what the trick is, because I really don't know. It just happens. But I think that that's helpful, is to just kind of be able to connect in any way that you can. And like that mom with the kids too, when we were talking about the report that had come out. So then it was like talking about the corn and the crops, and then it's like, oh, that reminds me, how's your building? They're building a building, or how's your building coming? And then it's like, okay, she mentioned the stress and anxiety about building the building. Then, well, how is your kid doing here with this, and that? And so it just kind of, I don't know, it flows in a way, but I don't know if that makes any sense. But
I second your thought, because in the course of the conversation, you pick up on the stress as to how you deal with that, how's that happening, what's not happening.
right?
I do that to my father-in-law.
And doesn't even know what's going on, does he? Thinks you're having a conversation. Anyone else that has things that have techniques or things that you use, or ways that you transition?
Well, and it shows that you're listening. If you validate, I'm hearing that you have a lot of stress,
Mm-hmm.
and then doing a segue into it, it just validates that you're sitting there and listening to them.
Right, very true.
I guess I have a question for you. I know you're in Watertown, so it's significantly bigger than where I'm at, but it's hard to, when you get people to open up, and then they see you outside of a counseling session,
Mm-hmm.
it's really hard to get that boundary with them, because I don't want to push it to the point that they don't want to come back in your office and see me, but
Right,
I also don't want to have a counseling session in public either. So
absolutely.
that's really hard for me.
And I understand that too, because I was a school counselor too, and so I had, you know, my kids go to school in the community where I was a counselor in, and obviously it was probably good timing to leave when my son was getting into middle school or whatever and stuff, and but it is hard, and I think part of it is sometimes I do a lot of talking about that before we really even, once we really have a good relationship started, or I'll remember, because I had this gal, she was doing a craft fair, and I was like, oh, we were talking about going to that. So I try to pick up on those kind of things. So if there's someplace I ever think I'm going to see somebody, the state fair is huge. I have lots of kids that I know that are in 4-H that I've seen. And so it's like, well, state fair time's coming up. What do you think? We might run into each other at the fair. What do you think? And so we really just talk about it, and then really making it a point to say, you know, these are things that we could maybe talk about when we run into each other, and here's some things maybe we shouldn't talk about. And then I think it's hard when in the moment, because they don't always remember. So to have a way to cut them off, and I think that's hard. Oh gosh, that's a great thought. You know, let's talk about that on Tuesday. You know, and that's hard to do, but I don't know if that helps at all, but it is. It's hard to navigate those. And Margie and I were just talking about a presentation that Dwayne and I had done at the conference a few years back about rural ethics, because it's very different than when they come and talk to us about ethics. It's not very different. There's some things that are different when we're talking about rural communities, because there's boundaries that are much harder to keep, and it's our job to try to keep those. So, and it's hard sometimes. Anything else you guys have? The weather is always great to talk about. Any other ideas of just things that you could talk about? Yeah.
I know in our community, something that's kind of important is who you know, like your people. Who are your
Okay.
people? You know?
Yeah.
And when they start making connections that way, then it's like, oh yeah, I know.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good point too. Yeah. So a way to kind of connect with them is also through other people too. Sometimes. Yeah. I don't know. A lot of small communities too. There's like their school sports team is kind of important too. So a little football talk or basketball talk, whatever the season is, sometimes can help too a little bit, depending on the community, or if you're from around the area that you kind of know what that team's doing. Sometimes we just don't know those things either. So, any other thoughts? I think the hardest though, is like we were talking about, is finding that good balance between that small talk and getting enough session in too. It's really sometimes too a lot of you being more directive, and sometimes I'm not always very directive in my counseling either, and so it's you kind of taking a little bit more control, a little bit more charge of the conversation too, and switching back, doing the job to switch it back, so.
But you can use that small talk and direct it towards what you want to talk about.
You absolutely can.
Because I'm a nursing home, I was in cardiopulmonary rehab, like an example, when we say, what did you do over the weekend, and when you went out to eat, you could say, what did you have to eat, and then that, you could call on your diet, or
Absolutely.
or your energy concentration. Then you just take it as a teaching moment, but it's in a conversation,
Right.
so you build off of it.
And that's a great example.
And it kind of alleviates their anxiety, like they're being judged.
Right, definitely. And I think that's really good too. In counseling, you do a lot of that too, I think. And so it's kind of like that conversation about how you guys were going to work cattle, I thought, this weekend. How did that go? Well, obviously, we all know, well, most of us know that that's kind of a stressful thing to do in the first place. You got family members out there, you know, my husband's yelling at whoever, I don't know what he's talking about. But anyway, that kind of thing happens, yeah. And so that leads right into that stress and anxiety too. And so there's lots of ways to kind of jump in there. The weather, I think, too, is an easy one. I mean, I don't know, we're from South Dakota. We talk about the weather all the time. But it's one of those things too that, oh, there's rain in the forecast or whatever. And that, right now, that's a stressful conversation no matter who you're talking to, whether we live in town or in the country on a lake. So very much so. We are done really early, and I'm not happy about that. I apologize. Do we want any conversations that you guys want to have just in general about? I think this is hard to do because it's easy to talk about it and try to, but it's not. You're not in the office and you're not doing that. Another thing that I was thinking about too the other day though was I've had a few people come in. They come right from the tractor. They come right from the barn. And, you know, there's mud tracked in or manure or whatever it is. You know, the jeans aren't quite so clean when they sit on your couch, that kind of stuff. And it happens because they're making an attempt to get to that appointment, and that's awesome that they got there. And so it's really important not to make a big deal out of it, because probably the first words out of their mouth are going to be, I'm so sorry, I had to rush here and I didn't get a chance to shower, I didn't get a chance to change. And to make them feel comfortable about that, I think, is so important. Yeah.
I got the reverse story. Back in the 80s, when
Yes.
parishioners were having troubles, so they got cleaned up to go to town and stop by the LSA office. The guy said, we should be coming here straight from the barn. So he said, next time he had an appointment, he went to the hog barn, dipped his boots in the trough, walked in, put his boots up on the man's desk. He said, I had to put my boots in the back of the truck to drive home.
He was trying to make a point, wasn't he? But I think that's, I don't know, I think it's just so important not to make them feel bad about any of that, because they got there, and I think that's what's just so important, really. You know, I've been in I just have a little office now, it's just me, and so I just vacuum when they leave, it's not a big deal. But you know, I've seen before where you've walked into an office or someone walks in after them, and then there's just more people there, and they make comments about it too, and that always kind of breaks my heart a little bit. You know, I don't know, I just always thought that wasn't very helpful, because that person really tried hard to get to their appointment. So the other thing that I was thinking a little bit about, I don't know, haven't charged for no-shows at all, but I think some private practice people do, and some offices I think do sometimes too. But I don't know, I kind of feel like that's not always, especially when you're dealing with someone that maybe they are in the field and they forgot or something like that, and they forgot to call. The reminder calls and texts these days help a ton with that kind of stuff. But that's just maybe another thought to think about too, with whatever population you're working on. I have a really hard time. I see like a lot of Medicaid people too, and so I have a really hard time saying, oh, you didn't show up, I'm going to charge you for that appointment. I just can't. I don't know. I haven't been able to do it yet, and I haven't gone broke, so I think that's a good thing. So, but with certain populations, certain people, I think it's an important thing to think about too. So.
Looking at other, like, maybe indirect ways of communicating with them, maybe like texting or scheduling a phone session or emailing, that kind of thing like that.
Emails are, actually most people have emails and they have it on their phone these days, and it's just with the confidentiality piece with HIPAA and all of that, you have to be careful. So I just make sure that if it's someone that likes to email, that I always have them, like that my paperwork usually says that email's kind of included in there, and it's in my informed consent and all that kind of stuff too. But I have some parents actually that really do a lot more communicating through email because they don't have 10 minutes to sit down with me and when their kid comes into the session or something like that too. But there are ways like that too. I think the texting for the reminders actually helps a lot. I wouldn't probably text very much except for the reminder, but and that's just my personal feeling about the whole thing. But emails sometimes can be, just checking in. I've had a few kids that, I don't know, like when school started, things just got kind of a bit busy from the transition to school starting. And so it's like, well, I haven't seen you guys for a while, just checking in, making sure everything's okay. Hope school started well. And then I usually get an email back from the parent or the child or something, just saying. Usually the parent. I don't usually email kids too often, but.
Have you heard in any of the more remote settings where they're doing any video counseling?
LSS has really gotten started doing more of that. They haven't done a ton, I don't think, just because they're having trouble just getting clinicians, I think, in general right now. But there are some, you can use, Zoom's a pretty good program to use, and so there's there's more telecounseling going on. Insurances are starting to pay for it more too, and some of that kind of thing too. I think it's a little harder to get used to. I've never done it personally, but I think for some of the remote areas it's important though too. I know there've been some work with some of the reservations with some of that, just even like in schools and stuff like that, because they can't get somebody out there all the time. So I am aware of some of that, but I think it's a whole area that we could tap more into too. You gonna say something? No? Sorry. If that's all, yeah.
How long are your sessions?
It varies a lot. Usually between 45 to 60 minutes. I have a lot of people that, they're there for 60 minutes and they're not leaving until it's. I have a lot of people like that too. There are times though I have some kids though that I see for 30 minutes, and then I meet with the parents for about 10 minutes or so. I do go to some schools too, and I do some counseling at mental health in the schools, and so those are usually about 30 minutes when I do that. But there's nothing wrong with a 45-minute session. I mean, that's originally what we started out with, and ideally that would be nice sometimes to have more of those. But well, thank you guys for coming. And I said this is really hard to really know what kind of stuff to really talk about, but I appreciate you participating and listening, and thank you.